Good evening and welcome to the evolution of films. Films have evolved into something magnificent and almost futuristic in a mere 125 years, making their impact on culture and civilization the biggest thing since the invention of the printing press. Since the conception of movies in the 1890s, when films were seconds or minutes long, billions of people have flocked to watch these marvels of modern mastery. When movies were created, cars weren't even the main source of transportation. Can you imagine riding a horse or a buggy to go see a silent film that lasted just seconds or minutes? Three things to keep in mind when we talk about films this evening. The artwork and the skill of films, movies as a staple of American culture in the 20th century, and a transformation of films into a futuristic computer-generated reality. The artwork and skill of films makes me think about the 1965 film The Agony Ecstasy with Charlton Heston as he played Michelangelo, and Rex Harrison as Pope Julius II in the creation of the Sistine Chapel. Making a movie is like creating a fine piece of art. Films are essentially recorded Broadway plays that were made to be more readily available to all classes of people. Going to the opera or a play on Broadway were a typically upper-class event. They were expensive, and were not something that your average factory worker or lower-class person could afford or wanted to attend. Vaudeville and other such plays were more geared toward people of the working class, where comedy and dancing were a big piece of entertainment. With the introduction of films of longer length in the 19-teens, anyone of any background could attend. These films created a widespread love for actors and actresses, and developed a cult-like following for many popular actors in the early 20th century. Throughout the last century of film, notice how many actors started their career in plays on Broadway and then went into film. You'll notice some of the best movie actors got their start performing on stage, like Benjamin Cumberbatch or Steve Martin. Stage acting often takes more skill in showing your audience your actions or feelings in any given role. When you are acting on stage, you want the person in the very last row to see your facial expressions and to hear you loudly. But in a movie, the video shows your face a lot clearer and more closely, and you don't have to express your actions so loudly. Movies were the staple of American culture of the 20th century. Films often painted a picture of a surreal life filled with fast cars, pretty people, and the biggest houses. When fan clubs weren't busy following their vocal darlings like Bing Crosby or Frank Sinatra in concert, they were falling in love with them in movies like High Society, Holiday Inn, or From Here to Eternity. Men weren't the only ones being gawked at in film, so were women. Actresses like Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, or Jean Crane were just a few of the Hollywood angels that enhanced female fashion, as well as a man's crush on a beautiful woman. In America, we always want what we can't have, and the freedom to carve your own path or obtain the unobtainable is a huge part of many success stories. We see that especially in the 1954 film Sabrina with Audrey Hepburn, Humphrey Bogart, and William Holden, where a chauffeur's daughter falls in love with the son of a rich family. During and after World War II, movies helped push patriotism and the drive to buy war bonds. There were 30 big-time movies made during World War II that helped push spirits up and give people a sense of purpose to help their boys overseas. Casablanca, Mrs. Miniver, and Road to Morocco were just a few of those films. Casablanca is a love story set in a Moroccan town with Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Sidney Greenstreet, who won the Best Picture for the Academy Award in 1942. Mrs. Miniver is a drama and war film set in early 1940s England, before the famed Battle of Dunkirk. The Road to Morocco was a comedy with Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, which is part of a series of films they did to help lighten the hearts of people during a troubled time. The third point this evening, the transformation of films into the futuristic, computer-generated reality. Technicolor, Big, Grand, and Colorful in 1939. You have Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, the first two films to be filmed completely in Technicolor. Since then, Gone with the Wind has accrued over $3.4 billion in net income, adjusted for inflation as of 2014. Lucasfilm and computer animation. Star Wars was developed in 1977 by George Lucas, and computer generation since then has really taken off. Lucasfilm was the first large-scope production company to dabble in computer animation and special effects. Since then, there is rarely a movie that doesn't include or is dominated by special effects and animation. Movies of such large scopes like Troy or the Lord of the Rings trilogies employed masterful artistry in makeup and costumes, while simultaneously using special effects to magnify and create large battle scenes, unlike movies from the first half of the 20th century. Films now have been able to cut down on hundreds or thousands of extras that were needed on sets by using modern computation in films. CGI-dominant films. Just last week I was discussing the Hobbit series by Peter Jackson, book written by J.R.R. Tolkien, as a poor trilogy utilizing too much CGI. Famed theater and stage actor Sir Ian McKellen, who played the Wizard Gandalf in both the LOTR trilogy and The Hobbit, was dismayed to have to act by himself in many scenes, because his counterparts were later added in through computer manipulation. When we hear stories like this, it makes us think about the direction of film and how it has taken a different and more modern path. 3D IMAX and the big screen are the next coolest thing in modern movie technology. The shift to digital movies from film happened in the late 90s and has since enhanced our ability to copy and edit movies. In the early part of the 20th century, films were literally cut and pasted physically. Although 70mm film has been around since the early years of film, it was hardly used. Only until the later part of the 20th century, and big films like Star Wars, was a 70mm camera more widely used. Now, in the second decade of the 21st century, we find digital 3D films more popular on the large screen. More recently, movies are shot almost entirely on digital film. Utilizing digital film makes it much easier to manipulate when making cuts and edits for the final version. Film was adjusted to the modern times, just like television, modern transportation, and dating. When we compare biblical masterpieces like the Ten Commandments, no pun intended, to modern marvels like Saving Private Ryan or Batman Begins, we see how filming and acting has truly changed over the years. If you take anything away from this speech on film, remember this: movies have defined us as a modern society and helped to develop culture, art, and technology while simultaneously creating some of the most fascinating achievements we could hope for in our short lives on Earth. Thank you for joining me this evening.